Boarding and
All right, welcome to State of the State, Distance Learning in Minnesota Adult Education. And this is a session presented by Literacy Minnesota as part of our support network. We are the Distance and Digital Learning Support Network team for Minnesota Adult Education. So we'll start out this morning with introductions. For those of you who don't know me, I am Susan Wettenkamp-Brandt. I'm the Senior Manager for Educational Technology and Digital Literacy at Literacy Minnesota. I've been there for 16 years, and I've been working in digital and online learning that whole time. And I help with professional development and technical assistance for adult ed programs around the state. And I will let my co-host, Tom, introduce himself.
Hi, this is Tom. I know some of you. I've been involved with Minnesota ABE since early 90s, so even more years than Susan. I've done a number of different things over the years. Right now, I'm just working part-time. I work helping to coordinate and manage the grant for the Distance Learning Tech project, which is presenting today. And I also now serve as the internal operations coordinator for the North Star program, which I helped create 13 years ago. So that's my current portfolio.
Always good to be here with you, Tom. All right, so our agenda for the session, we're going to talk about distance learning across Minnesota adult education, data and trends from the past year in terms of online classes and HyFlex classes and distance learning platforms. What's actually happening out there in the field? I'm going to show a little bit about how I, as a program manager, use SID to track distance learning and online learning and evaluate effectiveness. So I have this role on the support network for digital learning across the state, but I also have a role within Literacy Minnesota's direct service learning centers. I supervise all of our teaching staff and our digital literacy staff and distance learning staff. So I actually have a foot in the direct service side of adult education as well. And I'll talk a little bit about how I use SID to decide if my online and distance learning programming is working. We'll talk a little bit about trends in distance learning platforms because those are obviously a really important part of our distance learning efforts. And then we'll have some time for discussion, what's happening at your site, what kinds of trends are you seeing? So with that, I'm going to turn over to Tom to talk about doing the numbers on DL and Minnesota ABE.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. So we'd like to start by seeing if everybody using your Mentimeter can guess the percentage of statewide contact hours that are generated by online synchronous classes. So you just enter the code, you go into your Mentimeter and just add what you think it should be or is. And each one will show up.
And as I suspected would be the case, guesses are all over the place. And let me know when you're ready to see the correct answer.
Susan, what do the little flat points mean? Where there's the ones that aren't, they're flat instead of points, is that where two people have the same guess?
Yes, yes, that's where there's more than one.
Okay.
All right, should we see the answer?
Sure.
The correct answer is 12.
Wow. Not as high as a lot of people thought. Okay. We'll do the same thing now. If you can guess the percentage of ABE students that are enrolled in an online or a HyFlex class of some sort. And remember, students often are in online classes as well as in-person classes.
And again, just let me know when you're ready to see the results, we can see, oh, a number one guess here. 6 people guessing this one.
So ready to show it?
Shall we see? Wow, the number one guessers were about right here at 24.
All right.
Oh, good job on that one.
So here's a breakdown of the distance learning hours by type for this last year that just ended. There are 9% are DL proxy hours. There 12% are online synchronous hours. And then HyFlex classes account for 11% of the total. So as you can see, it's significant, but not huge, I would say, in terms of the number of hours that fall into the distance learning category. And we've improved SID a lot over the years, so we're really able to closely track the various types of hours now in a way that we did not used to be able to. So in terms of the types of classes, we know there's a lot of variation around the state. There are 26 consortia, which is just a little over half, I believe, are offering online synchronous classes. 23 are offering HyFlex classes, and then the percentage of students who enrolled in an online or HyFlex class is about a quarter. Again, so pretty similar. In terms of how many students are engaging with asynchronous DL, we tried to look at those who had at least 5 DL proxy hours, because that's kind of a low bar, but it means that you can drop in just one time. So 31% of participants, those with 12 hours or more who had a pre-test, there were 31%. And when you look at all enrollees, disregarding the number of hours, so it would be participants plus those with just a few hours, it's only 20%. But I think the participant is the one that's number is the one that's really the more significant one in terms of what's actually happening.
And to me, that seems a bit low. I was surprised that it's only about 30% of students doing some amount of distance learning. I anticipated it to be higher than that.
Right.
So I was a little surprised by that.
And we know, and we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the fact that generally outcomes are pretty positive when there's a combination of some distance learning coupled with some in-person learning. So hopefully that will, over time, number of people involved in distance learning will continue to increase slightly.
Yeah. And now we'd like to do another little bit of an activity. So we would like to invite everybody attending the session to share how those statewide trends line up with what's happening in your program. What is the mix of programming at your site? So when you open up this activity, you'll be able to add percentage points to each of these categories, and then you can submit that. So I'm curious to see if people who are interested in distance learning and come to a session about it have more distance learning than the state as a whole. We're still getting a few people joining in here. Give people a little more time on this one. It takes a little bit more to enter. And estimates are fine if you don't know. So far I am seeing that actually this group is skewing really heavily towards in-person classes and slightly more on DL platforms as compared to online synchronous classes. Somebody put other. I am curious who said other and what is your other? You can put it in the chat or you can call it out. Maybe Gail can watch the chat and see if somebody responds what their other is.
I would say this, I work in DLC correction, so distance learning for different reasons
Okay.
in
So
that
maybe
type of
some sort
way.
of like paper-based sort of distance learning kind of thing.
Yes, state approved curriculum for distance learning for all types of circumstances.
Okay, good to know. Anybody else put other? Feel free to chime in if you would like. We're a small enough group, I think we can do that. Well, actually, we're not small. Goodness, we have 113 people here. Where'd they all come from? All right, well, let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been seeing in terms of modalities of instruction. So HyFlex is really new since 2020. And then also during the pandemic, there was a huge period of sort of innovation, trying different things, distance only classes, teacher verification model was invented. We approved the option to have teacher created online courses. And there was a lot of speculation that that sort of innovation would kind of peter out after people came back to in-person classes. And what's interesting is that that has not happened. This year, and we'll see the data in a little while when we talk about platforms, for the first time ever, when I pulled the annual report for what are the most commonly used proxy hour platforms in the state, teacher verification model hit the top 10. That's never happened before. And also, teacher-created online courses are divided into two because there's in SID one for unit completion and there's one for time on task. And time on task and unit completion teacher-created courses are number 11 and number 12 most commonly used platforms in the state this past year. And if you combined those two into one, they would make it into the top 10 as number 8. So while there was a lot of activity around these things during the pandemic and a lot of focus on them and people talking about them as new things, what's interesting is that now it's just sort of normal. It's chugging right along. People adopted these models, they made lessons, they created systems, and now they're just sort of doing it, right? It's not a hot topic. People aren't really thinking about it a lot, I don't think. They're just doing it like it's normal, which is really interesting to me because for a long time there was a lot of discussion about it, but not as many hours. And now there's less discussion, but there's a lot more hours. And then HyFlex, we know that's really grown in some programs. So there are some adult ed programs that are actually mandating HyFlex for all classes. So all their in-person classes also have a hybrid option where people can join online. And I think that is part of the push, sort of the reason why HyFlex is becoming a larger percentage of the hours and the students in the state. It's because some large programs are moving in that direction. I have seen that it's less likely for a program to have just one or two HyFlex classes. They're either sort of all in and they do a lot of it, or they don't do any. I'm curious to hear from folks when we get to the discussion at the end, how that's working for people with HyFlex, because what we have seen is that while there's strong demand for HyFlex from program managers and from students, we are seeing that teachers are feeling a lot of burnout with it. And I am curious to hear from folks how that's going. Are teachers feeling supported? What are managers doing to make HyFlex work? So if you feel like chiming in on the chat, you can do that now, or we'll have some time to have that conversation when we get to the discussion towards the end of the presentation. And Tom, do you want to talk about some of these trends over time?
Right. Well, to nobody's great surprise, during COVID, there was a huge increase in the number of participants in online and HyFlex classes as we started to create those models and implement them, because everybody was shut down. So that was about the only way we could deliver services. I remember Susan and I being online a great deal during that time, meeting with many people, trying to help people make that transition. Since COVID, the number of students in online and HyFlex classes has stayed pretty steady, about a quarter of all participants. And interestingly, overall, distance learning proxy hours have declined a little bit. Last year, it was 9% proxy, 11% HyFlex, and 12% online synchronous. So, and also the overall number of students with 5 or more distance learning hours has declined slightly since COVID. 31%, we mentioned this earlier, 31% of participants, 20% of all enrollees. So we sort of feel like after a period of pretty significant disruption, we've sort of settled into a new normal now where the percentages are holding pretty steady. And I think we're really curious if people, either now or when we discuss later, if people are satisfied, excuse me, with the mix of classes that you're offering at your sites. And do you think the mix of classes and delivery means is responsive to what your students are asking for? It's a little bit hard at our level to know exactly what students are most interested in. So, you see Karen Walters has put in a comment that it's important not to have teachers at HyFlex all day. Her site in Mankato, they switch it up so that teachers have some in person, and there's only one person that's doing only HyFlex 3 hours a day. And I think we have come to realize that trying to doing things that are basically both online and in person at the same time is difficult. I'm on a board of directors, and we have hybrid meetings because we have some people who can't attend in person, and it definitely takes a lot more time and attention and multitasking, which I think is pretty exhausting. So I'm curious what other people are finding.
Yeah, thanks for calling that one out. And then I also see there was a comment in the chat from Paulina saying that it took a long time at their site to build their time on task courses, but now that they have them, they're up and running and easy to use. So I think that's likely true for a lot of folks. Like there's this upfront cost, right? It takes a lot to build the course, but once you have the course, then you keep using it in an ongoing way, and now it becomes less intensive, right?
I'm also wondering if people are seeing how their teachers are responding to being willing to and wanting to teach HyFlex classes, since it is a little bit more demanding way to provide services. So if anyone has any thoughts?
Karen, do you want to turn on your mic and share a little bit about how you're using teaching assistants in your HyFlex classes?
Sure. I work in Mankato, Minnesota. We have a fairly large site that has all-day classes from 8:30 to 1. We do offer HyFlex classes regularly. We have for several years. It's been a learning process. We discovered that having HyFlex has really helped our student attendance, because when students have barriers, they can attend from home or they can attend in the class. They can switch back and forth. But having an assistant in the classroom has been key to the success of HyFlex for us. The teacher is sitting at the front of the room, pretty much at their desk with the machine in front of them, and the students are in the room, some are online. And so when something happens either in the room where a student is new, doesn't know what they're doing, can't follow along, that assistant is in the back of the room, looking across the room, monitoring screens, making sure people are following, because every one of our HyFlex students in the room is on the Google Meet, as well as the people at home are on the Google Meet. So she can kind of keep track of who's following, who's tracking, who's off, doesn't know what they're doing, isn't logged in or whatever. And she can go to each person and get them on. And the teacher doesn't leave their station because the teacher's teaching to the online and the in-person at the same time. Also, if things in the room are going fine, the assistant can go in the hallway quick and have a breakout room with a person who is struggling online, or make a quick phone call, check to see why people aren't online or why they didn't log in today. Send some quick emails or make some quick phone calls to see if the reason they're not there is a technical issue. It might be a technical issue, or it might be just an absence. So that allows the teacher to keep teaching and not fall behind or stop or have to do troubleshooting in the middle of the class, which can be very disruptive to the learning. So I highly recommend that if you do HyFlex learning, you have a model that will support moving the class forward. Otherwise, you're constantly stopping and helping and redirecting, and that isn't effective that way. So we also have 2 screens up in the front of the room projecting. One of those screens is projecting what's at home. The other screen is projecting the students at home if they want to see the Brady Bunch on the wall. We implemented that in one class this year, and so far that's going well. We're going to add some more monitors in the other rooms this year. But for us, HyFlex has really improved our student attendance.
That's
And
great to hear.
and
Yeah.
it is exhausting for teachers.
Yes.
So you have
See,
to be
that's the
cognizant.
tension that I think people are feeling, right? Like the students really benefit, and we want to do what's best for our students, but it's really draining on the teacher's stamina because they've got this extra layer of, I have to think about all my students' tech
People at
needs
home.
constantly, right?
Yeah. And a good way to start is to just have a learner platform for every class, regardless of whether that's HyFlex or online or in person. Use a learner platform for every class, because then the students get used to going to the Google Classroom or whatever you're using, getting their materials there, accessing things there. And once they get used to that, and teachers get used to that type of prep, that everything goes on a classroom for accessibility reasons, then when you move to HyFlex, you have that standard in your program set up so that people are used to that.
Yeah.
And
So
then when
an
you move to
on-ramp,
HyFlex,
right? You get people used to part of the technology first before you launch the rest of the technology.
Right.
That's really smart. I also want to call out a chat from Mary Beth in the Zoom chat saying that students, she thinks, are using distance learning platforms less because they spend so much time online regularly and they don't want to be on the screen anymore. And I have actually found that to be true with some of our English language learners also, that they're just like, oh, too much screens. I just want some paper, right? So we've actually been doing ReadWorks as one of our DL platforms, which has, both an online version and a paper version. And students have been really gravitating towards using the paper packet version because they're just like, oh, I need some just offline time, right? So there's this sort of screen fatigue, not just with learning, but in all their other aspects of their lives, right?
I'm also curious when people are doing HyFlex classes, whether they're seeing a lot of students switch back and forth between sometimes being in person and sometimes being online, or whether students are just sort of subdividing themselves, mostly doing one or the other.
Yeah, I don't know that we have that data from SID because the students in SID are tracked. The class is HyFlex. We don't mark whether they're coming online or they're coming in person, so we don't really have that data. But it would be really interesting if teachers could track that data. But we should probably move ahead, although I can see there's a lot happening in the chat. So Gail, if there's something really valuable to share from the chat, let me know, and if I missed it. But I think we're going to move ahead for the moment. Because I would like to talk a little bit about hotline data also. So you might know that Literacy Minnesota also operates the Adult Literacy Hotline, and that is statewide, and adults can call or text and say that they need classes in their area, and the hotline staff will help them find classes. And you'll notice that these numbers don't add up to 100. That's not an error. It's because people can choose more than one thing. So people might be listed in more than one category. But what I found was interesting is that about 26% of people are looking for online classes, and that's about the percentage of students across the state that are doing online classes, which to me feels like we have found the right balance. That the offerings we have as a system are about the right mix for what students are calling in and looking for. So that felt really good to me when I looked at that data. The other thing that I saw is that students really prefer evening classes over morning classes, or else they have no preference, right? So they either say, oh, anything is fine, whatever is available, or they strongly prefer to be in the evening. And I think that that is partly because of the strong labor market right now. A lot of people are working and they're working during the day, and they need to be able to come to classes at night. And I can say from my own program in Minneapolis that has both daytime and evening programming, the evening is booming. We've had to add an extra session or section of our beginning English class, and we still have wait lists. And in the morning, that is not the case. We don't have long waiting lists in the morning like we do in the evening. So I feel like there's a strong preference for evening classes, at least in the Twin Cities metro area. I'd be curious to hear if that's true also in greater Minnesota. All right, moving along here. I want to talk a little bit about effectiveness of different service modalities. And Tom, did you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, people often are curious about what's the best mix of services. And what we find in SID data, that learners who have between 10 and 30% of their hours in distance learning are slightly more than 40% level gain rate, which is pretty good. Versus the statewide for all of the learners is 32. And that pretty much plays out what we've seen over the years when we've looked at the data, that some distance learning can be very helpful, too much can be not helpful, and none at all, you don't get quite as good of results. So ideally, we think the best use of distance learning is to have that in addition to some in-class time, so students have a mix of what they can use. Also, want to caution that just because the figures look a certain way doesn't mean it's, as I say, correlation is not causation. DL may boost outcomes, but it's also possible that students who are more motivated and have more resources to devote to learning are choosing to add distance learning to the regular classroom hours. So it's a little bit hard to tease aside those factors to know for sure what is what. But generally, all the research shows, of course, that greater intensity of learning hours per week boosts outcomes in general. So sort of take it all with a grain of salt, but certainly are indications that a favorable way of providing instruction is to have some distance learning in addition to your main in-class time.
All right, and on that note, I'm going to look a little bit at SID data and how I use SID to track some of my online and distance learning efforts as an adult ed manager. So if you are familiar with SID, which I'm sure you probably are, and the reporting features in SID, one of the things that I find most helpful as a manager is the use of subsites, because I have set up that my online synchronous classes on Zoom are a separate subsite. My distance learning proxy hour classes are all in a separate subsite. And our different physical locations are also in subsites. And that way I can compare how are my online classes, the students in those classes, comparing in terms of attendance rates, post-test rates, level gain rates to my in-person students. Because although it's possible for students to do both, and sometimes they do, especially if there's a specialty class that's only available online, but they're also an in-person class in the morning. For our core classes, students who are attending core online ESL are not also attending core in-person ESL, right? So I can actually sort of tease those out and see how are people doing across those different subsites. And I find that to be a really useful tool because I can break it out and see comparing different sites. So one of the big questions that has been sort of in the air around distance learning since the beginning of the pandemic is, are online ESL classes effective? Right? There are people who have this sort of gut instinct that I'm just talking at a bunch of black rectangles with names on them and I never see their faces and they don't say anything. And how can this possibly be effective, right? And yet, my data, at least for my sites, if we look at those data by subsite, is that it's comparable. So of my main sites, one in St. Paul, one in Minneapolis, one online, St. Paul's doing the best. Minneapolis is doing slightly lower than the online students. So the online students are in the middle. But there's a couple of important caveats here. One is that Minneapolis is the only location that has evening classes, and evening classes are shorter. So again, we're looking, oh, geez, what did I just click? I just clicked the wrong thing. Hold on. I'm going to pause that and get back to my main screen here. Hold on. I'm going to stop that share and get back to my slide deck. I didn't want to see the results. I want to see the actual slides. Hold on one second. All right, here we go. Got it back up. I got to get back to my Zoom here and reshare this for you all. Apologies. Happy clicking. I tried to hide my chat window and instead I hid my slides. All right, so as I was saying, Minneapolis is the only site that has evening classes, and evening classes are typically shorter, right? And we know that intensity of service matters. And then also in St. Paul, we have students attending more elective classes. They stay longer after their morning ESL class. And so what we're seeing is that students who are engaging more hours per day are the ones who are having higher post-test rates and level gain rates compared to students who are doing fewer hours of instruction. What doesn't seem to be a driver of outcomes is modality, right? So students who are attending online and students who are attending in person are both having approximately equivalent results. So I found that really interesting, and I thought something valuable to share because there is this sort of myth, I think, among teachers that online classes are not effective, but that is not borne out by my data. So one thing to think about is, how can we improve? One thing to look at might be adding distance learning platforms where students are weaker. So if you've got like a GED or a pre-GED program and you've got students doing math and ELA, looking to see where their weaknesses are and assigning DL in that area could be really effective. Also trying to boost more people to that at least 5 hours of distance learning and getting their instructional hours per week up might also help drive outcomes, because we do see that that does help students move forward towards their goals faster. And also it can help just with level gain rates, because of course you have to get people to 40 hours before you can test them, and putting in a few extra distance learning hours might boost them past that 40 hours where you can actually give people a post-test. So that's helpful too. All right, so I have a question here for folks. If you are in the Mentimeter and would like to chime in, are you using subsites to track data in this way? And then if so, what trends are you seeing in your data? Are your online classes showing approximately equivalent outcomes and post-test rates, or are you having differentiation between your in-person and your online students? And I'm going to pop over and check the chat, see if people are laughing at me for clicking on the wrong thing. No, nobody called me out. Susan, you're the tech person. You're not supposed to have technical issues in your session.
Susan, there's a question in the chat from somebody. I'm not sure who exactly it was directed towards. It says, are you open to teachers coming to your site to observe your HyFlex program in action?
I believe that is directed at Karen, so I will let her respond to that. Oh, a couple of people saying they are not doing subsites, but they would like to try that. All right. Or you're using subsites differently. Yes. You're actually like you have your physical locations, right, as your subsites. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to be able to see that online data compared to my in-person data. Can we use subsites? Not to my knowledge. All right, well, we've got a number of more slides to get to, so I think I'm going to advance and we're going to talk about DL platforms a little bit. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have the ability in SID to track which platforms are the most commonly used across the state. And we've been tracking this data for some years now. So I'm going to show trends for the last 3 years in DL platforms.
Susan, we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes. I know. We got to chug along here. So most commonly used DL platforms in the 21-22 program year, number 1 was MobiMax by a pretty strong lead. And then after that was ReadWorks and Burlington English. And last year, 22-23, same 3, but the gaps between them are growing. And then this most recent program year, 23-24, it's still the same 3, but Burlington English is now in number 2 place, and it's very, very close to MobiMax. So Burlington English, if you guys are in the call here, way to go! You're really moving your distance learning hours. That's really impressive. And then ReadWorks is also, I know, really popular because, like I said, with our students, they have that paper option. There's an online version option, right? There's also the paper option, and that I think has been really appealing for a lot of folks. And I think it's also used in the DOC. So that's probably where we're seeing a number of hours coming from. But our state-supported MobiMax license is still number 1. We'll see if next year Burlington English surpasses it. One thing that I thought was interesting in the trends for distance learning platforms is that teachers are seeking more ways to customize their distance learning offerings. So the most popular platforms tend to be things where teachers can either create custom assignments of some kind or pick and choose content to deliver to students, as opposed to things where the teacher doesn't have a lot of control and the curriculum is what the curriculum is and the student just moves through it. So I think that's also reflective of our desire to have our distance learning work in tandem with our in-person learning, and also that we have strong teachers who want to be able to customize and give students exactly what they're looking for. And then platform observations on just total number of hours and learners, they are going up, right? So we have more learners enrolled in DL and we have more DL proxy hours. So it's not that people are using it less necessarily. It's that it isn't growing as fast as other parts of ABE. So it's as a proportion of total hours, it's going down, but the actual number of proxy hours and the actual number of students enrolled is still growing. So we have just a couple of minutes. I think actually rather than having folks chime in on the text response here, we'll just take a couple of minutes for more discussion. And I know we've had some already, and we've talked a little bit about what's working in terms of HyFlex. What other trends are you seeing in person or virtual, and what's working? And then Tom, did you want to say anything about this last question? I know that was of interest to you.
But you mean the expectations?
Yeah.
Question? Yeah, just curious what the expectations are at individual programs regarding distance and online learning. Are managers setting certain ratios of time that teachers should spend? Is it more in response to what learners are requesting? Just kind of curious where the field is in terms of the actual in the classroom teaching staff around this.
Yeah, and feel free to just unmute and call out if you have anything you'd like to share, or if you want to drop it in the chat, we can call out some of the chat comments. Oh, Chelsea is mentioning in the chat that she does use subsites to track online versus in-person, and their level gains are also comparable. That's good to hear. It's not just me. And Laura is saying that students who are doing at least 5 hours of their platform NGen are showing higher level gain rates than students who are not doing NGen. So that's great to hear too. And it's helping them get language learning related to career fields that they might not otherwise get. So that's also really powerful use of DL there. What else have we got in the chat?
Well, he's asking regrets that we don't have NGen as a state supported platform any longer.
Well, we just had it only 1 year as a pilot. And I think it's similar to Burlington English in terms of the way the seats are distributed. It makes it difficult to manage it on a statewide level, but that doesn't mean it's not a good platform. And I actually also still have NGen at my site too. I've got some seats and we've got learners on it, and I like it as a platform. It's just logistically difficult to manage in a statewide way. And then Karen is saying in the chat that online learning has allowed the Southwest region to collaborate on regional programming, and that's been a game changer. I would agree. Yes, I think that's also happening at the statewide level, right? We have specialty classes that we couldn't offer otherwise because you wouldn't have enough people to make a cohort. But if you open it up to a larger area, a region, or even statewide, you can make a go of things that otherwise wouldn't be possible, right? And Abby is saying that they're in a one-room schoolhouse, and they're finding, combined with what they offer students joining distance learning synchronous classes for subjects where they could use more homogeneous class of peers, is really great. Ah, yes. So your program is small, so those online, regional, or statewide classes gives them a chance to join a cohort of learners. That's really cool. Yay for collaboration. All right, well, I think we are at time. So I think I'm going to stop my screen share, and Gail can go ahead and stop the recording.